Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of the starship Defiance. The massive ship floated in space near Earth's moon. Through the thick glass windows, she could see the blue marble of her home planet spinning slowly in the darkness. But her attention was focused on the holographic display in front of her dock. The display showed 12 alien faces staring back at her. Each one looked different from the others. Some had scales like reptiles. Others looked like giant insects with multiple eyes. One appeared to be made of living crystal that sparkled with inner light. Another seemed to be a cloud of gas held together by some kind of energy field. These were the representatives of the Galactic Council. For over 200 years, they had controlled most of the galaxy. Every species that wanted to travel between stars had to follow their rules. Every planet that wanted to trade with others had to get their permission. The Council decided who could build what, who could live where, and who could do what. The largest alien in the display was speaking. It was a Vorthak, standing nearly 10 feet tall with silver armor covering its insect-like body. Its voice was deep and cold as it spoke the words that would change everything. The human species has violated the sacred accords for the last time, the Vorthak said. Its name was Speaker Zorthik, and it had been the head of the council for 50 years. You have expanded into star systems without permission. You have refused to limit your population growth. You have spread dangerous ideas about individual freedom to other species. Admiral Chun listened without showing any emotion on her face. Around her, the bridge crew of the Defiance watched the transmission with worried expressions. Some of them were young officers who had never seen real combat. Others were veterans who remembered the border skirmishes with alien pirates. But none of them had ever faced the full might of the Council's war machine. Your species has 30 standard cycles to surrender completely, Speaker Zorthik continued. You will abandon all colonies outside your home system. You will submit to Council oversight of your government. You will accept population controls and genetic monitoring. If you refuse, we will destroy every human settlement in the galaxy. The other council members nodded their agreement. Admiral Chun had studied each of their species. During her 40 years in the Earth Defense Force, the hegemony controlled the northern spiral arm with their massive slave armies. The consortium owned most of the galaxy's mining operations and industrial worlds. The Protectorate claimed to keep peace, but really just enforced council law with their police fleets. We have crushed 47 species that defied council authority, Speaker Zorthik said. Some fought bravely. Others begged for mercy. None survived as independent civilizations. You have 30 cycles to make your choice. The holographic display flickered and went dark. The bridge of the Defiance fell silent. Admiral Chun could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines and the quiet beeping of computer systems. But no one spoke. They were all waiting for her to react. She took off her military cap and ran her fingers through her gray hair. She had been expecting this moment for 20 years. Ever since she was a young captain, she had known it would come. The Council would never allow humanity to remain free. They were too different, too independent, too unwilling to follow rules they had no part in making. Admiral Chun walked to the main display screen and looked at the tactical readout. It showed the positions of human colonies scattered across 50 star systems. Each dot of light represented millions of people living their lives, working their jobs, raising their families. All of them were now targets for the Council's war fleets. She turned back to her bridge crew. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, her tactical officer, was staring at his console with a pale face. Captain Martinez, the ship's navigator, was checking and rechecking their position coordinates. Dr. Williams, the ship's chief medical officer, was reviewing emergency procedures on her tablet. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez said quietly, "what are your orders?" Admiral Chun looked at each of her officers in turn. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity. They deserved to know the truth. She had kept secrets for too long. "Signal all fleet commanders," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "Send them activation code Prometheus. Tell them the waiting is over." The bridge crew looked confused. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez frowned at his console. "Admiral, I don't have any record of activation code Prometheus in our files." Admiral Chun smiled for the first time since the transmission had started. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that had been hiding in tall grass, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "You wouldn't," she said. "That code activates protocols that have been classified above your security level. But now that the Council has declared war, those protocols are in effect." She walked to the command chair and sat down. Her fingers moved across the control panel, entering codes that unlocked systems the bridge crew had never seen before. New displays appeared on their screens. New data flowed across their terminals. And slowly, a picture began to form of something much larger than they had ever imagined. "Admiral," Captain Martinez said, his voice full of amazement, "these readings show ship movements throughout human space. But according to this data, we have 3 times more vessels than our official fleet records show." Admiral Chun nodded. "The Council has been watching us for decades. They know about every official ship in our fleet, every registered transport, every documented military vessel. What they don't know about are the ships we've been building in secret." Dr. Williams looked up from her tablet. "The supply requests I've been filing for the past 5 years. The medical supplies that seemed like too much for our official crew size. Were those for the crews of ships that officially don't exist," Admiral Chung confirmed. "For the past 20 years, humanity has been preparing for this war. We knew it would come. The Council has never allowed a truly free species to exist in their galaxy. Every attempt at independence has been crushed." She stood up and walked back to the observation window. Earth hung in space below them, beautiful and peaceful. But Admiral Chun knew that peace was about to end. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you declared war on a species that had been quietly preparing for that war for 2 decades. "Finally," she said quietly, so only she could hear the word. But Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez had sharp ears. "Admiral, did you say something?" She turned back to face her crew. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with a fire that none of them had ever seen before. "I said finally," she repeated, louder this time. "For 20 years we've had to pretend to be weak. We've had to act like we were afraid of the Council. Of the lie duo. We've had to act like we were afraid of the Council, like we were afraid of the Council. We've had to hide our true capabilities and let them think they were superior." She walked to the tactical display and pointed at the dots, representing Council fleets moving toward human space. "But now they've declared war. Now we don't have to pretend anymore. Now we can show them what humanity really looks like when we stop holding back." The bridge crew stared at her with a mixture of fear and excitement. They were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about their own military was wrong. Admiral Chun could see the questions forming in their minds. But there would be time for explanations later. "All ships," she said to the communication system. "This is Admiral Chun. Execute Order Prometheus. The masquerade is over. Let's show the galaxy what we've really been building out here." The Council war fleets moved through space like a dark tide. Hundreds of massive ships formed perfect geometric patterns as they approached the edge of human territory. Each vessel was larger than anything humans had ever built, at least according to the Council's intelligence reports. The aliens had been studying humanity for decades, and they knew exactly what they were facing. Fleet Commander Vex Thala stood on the bridge of the hegemony, Dreadnought, Eternal Glory. The tall, scaled alien had conquered 12 different species during his long career. He understood the patterns of war better than most creatures in the galaxy. First came the overwhelming display of force. Then came the desperate attempts at negotiation. Finally came the quick collapse as the enemy realized they could not win. Reports from all sectors, Commander, said his tactical officer, a smaller hegemony warrior named Krilthan. Human colonies are evacuating in disorder. Their civilian ships are fleeing toward their core systems. No sign of organized military resistance. Vexthela nodded with satisfaction. This was proceeding exactly as he had expected. Humans were known to be emotional creatures who acted without thinking. When faced with superior force, they would panic like any other primitive species. The Council had given him 30 cycles to complete the conquest, but he expected to finish in half that time. What about their military vessels? He asked. Scattered patrol ships retreating ahead of our advance, Krilthan replied. A few outdated frigates trying to escort civilian transports. Nothing that poses any real threat to our forces. Through the main viewing screen, Vexthela could see human ships in the distance. They looked small and fragile compared to his massive fleet. The humans were running away as fast as their primitive engines could carry them. Some of their ships were so old that they left visible engine trails as they fled. The humans are behaving exactly as predicted, said another officer, this one from the consortium. The crystalline being's voice chimed like broken glass. Our analysis of their psychology was correct. When faced with certain defeat, they attempt to save what they can rather than fighting hopeless battles. Vexthela had read the psychological reports prepared by Council scientists. Humans were described as aggressive, but not particularly intelligent. They had reached space travel through luck rather than skill. Their technology was crude copies of designs stolen from other species. Their military doctrine was based on outdated concepts that had not evolved in centuries. Deploy the fleet according to standard conquest protocol, Vexthela ordered. First battle group will secure the outer colonies. Second and third groups will pursue the fleeing civilian vessels. Fourth group will establish orbital control over industrial worlds. The massive alien fleet began to spread out across human space. This was how the Council had conquered the galaxy, one system at a time. Overwhelming force applied with perfect coordination. No species had ever successfully resisted once the Council committed to full conquest. Admiral Chun watched the enemy fleet movements from her command center deep inside an asteroid field. The Defiance and 50 other human ships floated silently among the rocks, their engines shut down and their hulls disguised to look like mining equipment. Advanced sensors tracked every Council vessel as they spread out across human territory. They're taking the bait perfectly, said Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. He had been briefed on the real situation during the past few hours, and he was still struggling to understand the scope of what humanity had been hiding. All Council fleets are moving into the predetermined zones. Admiral Chun studied the tactical display with cold eyes. The enemy ships were positioning themselves exactly where human strategists had hoped they would. For 20 years, humanity had been studying Council military doctrine. They knew how the aliens fought. They knew how the aliens thought. And they had prepared accordingly. Status report on Ghost Fleet operations, she requested. All Ghost Fleet vessels are in position, reported Captain Martinez. The enemy has no idea our real fleet exists. Their sensors are detecting exactly what we want them to detect. The Ghost Fleet was humanity's greatest secret. While the Council had been watching the official human navy, thousands of engineers and shipbuilders had been working in hidden facilities throughout human space. Asteroid mining operations that were really shipyards. Scientific research stations that were really weapons laboratories. commercial transport routes that were really supply lines for a massive military buildup. The fleeing civilian ships are actually our fastest attack vessels in disguise, Admiral Chun explained to her officers. What looks like an evacuation is really the largest military redeployment in human history. Every ship the Council thinks is running away is actually moving into attack position. On the main display, human vessels continued their apparent retreat. But Admiral Chun could see the truth that the aliens could not. Those ships were not fleeing in panic. They were moving with precise coordination, drawing the Council fleets into carefully prepared killing zones. The enemy is spreading their forces across 12 star systems, observed Dr. Williams. That seems like a tactical mistake. It is, Admiral Chun agreed. The Council has grown arrogant after centuries of easy victories. They think they understand human capabilities based on what we've allowed them to see. They have no idea what we've really been building. Fleet Commander Vestala was pleased with the progress of the invasion. His ships had occupied 6 human colonies without firing a shot. The fleeing humans had abandoned valuable infrastructure and industrial facilities. The hegemony would be able to use those resources to fuel further conquests. Commander, reported Krulton, we're detecting some unusual readings from the asteroid fields in this sector. Possibly mineral deposits that could be valuable for extraction. Have the geology teams investigate after we secure the system, Vexthala ordered. He was not particularly interested in mining operations. His job was conquest, not resource extraction. Let the consortium worry about strip mining, human worlds. What he did not know was that those asteroid fields contained the most advanced warships humanity had ever built. Ships designed not for exploration or trade, but for one specific purpose: destroying Council fleets. Each vessel was equipped with weapons technology that pushed beyond everything the Council thought was possible. Admiral Chun checked the chronometer on her display. The Council fleets had been in human space for 18 hours. They had spread out across multiple star systems, chasing what they believed were fleeing refugees. Their formations had become loose and scattered as they pursued easy targets. All Ghost Fleet. Commander's report ready, said Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. Excellent. Admiral Chun stood up and walked to the main tactical display. Red dots showed Council fleet positions. Blue dots showed human ships, both the decoy vessels and the hidden attack fleet. The pattern was perfect. The aliens had positioned themselves exactly where humanity wanted them. She thought about the years of preparation that had led to this moment. The secret conferences between human military leaders. The hidden research programs that had developed new weapons and defense systems. The careful intelligence operations that had kept the Council from discovering the truth. Most of all, she thought about all the humans who had lived under Council restrictions for decades. People who had been told where they could live, what they could build, how many children they could have. Entire generations who had grown up knowing their species was considered inferior by alien overlords. Signal all Ghost Fleet vessels, Admiral Chun ordered. Execute Order Prometheus. Authorization code Alpha 77 Tango. Across 12 star systems, human warships began to power up their engines. Weapon systems that had been hidden for 20 years came online. Ships that officially did not exist dropped their disguises and revealed their true nature. Fleet Commander Vexthala was reviewing reports from his subordinates when every alarm on his bridge began screaming at once. His tactical officer was staring at his displays with an expression of total disbelief. Commander, Krulton said, his voice shaking, I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the sector. Ships are appearing on sensors where nothing existed before. Vexthala looked at the tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in decades: fear. The screen was filled with red warning indicators. Hundreds of human vessels were appearing out of nowhere, their weapons charged and ready to fire. How is this possible? He demanded, but there was no time for answers. The human fleet was already moving to attack, and Vexthala realized that everything the Council thought they knew about humanity was wrong. The first human attack came from a direction that should have been impossible. Fleet Commander Vexthala watched in shock as weapons fire erupted from what his sensors had identified as an empty asteroid field. Brilliant streams of plasma, brighter and hotter than anything in Council records, tore through space toward his scattered fleet. "Shields up! All weapons online!" He shouted, but his orders came too late. The human weapons struck with devastating precision. Vexthala's flagship, the Eternal Glory, shuddered as its shields collapsed under the assault. These were not the crude plasma cannons the Council had seen in border skirmishes. This was something new, something that burned with the heat of a star's core. "Damage report," he demanded. "Forward shields are down 60%. His engineer reported. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. The weapons that hit us are operating at energy levels we thought were impossible." Across the bridge, alarms continued to scream. Vexthala's tactical display showed a nightmare scenario. Human ships were emerging from hiding places throughout the star system. What had appeared to be mining stations were revealing themselves as heavily armed battle platforms. Civilian transports were dropping fake hull plating to expose military-grade weapon systems. "The fleeing refugee ships," Krilthan said with growing horror. "They're turning around. They're not civilian vessels at all." Vexthala realized the terrible truth. The humans had not been fleeing in panic. Every ship movement, every apparent retreat, every sign of disorder had been carefully planned. The Council fleet had been led into a trap that had been 20 years in the making. Admiral Palev Chun stood on the bridge of the Defiance as her ship emerged from its hiding place among the asteroids. Around her, the true human fleet was finally revealing itself. Sleek warships that had been disguised as space debris powered up their engines. Hidden weapons platforms began tracking enemy targets. The ghost fleet that had existed in secret for 2 decades was finally free to act. "All ships report ready for combat," said Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. His voice was steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. The Council fleet still outnumbered them in total mass, but the humans had advantages the aliens could not have expected. "Target priority is enemy command vessels," Admiral Chun ordered. "Hit their flagships first. We want to disrupt their coordination before they can reorganize." The human weapons were unlike anything the Council had encountered. Instead of the standard plasma bolts used by most galactic civilizations, humanity had developed something far more destructive. Their particle accelerators could launch projectiles at nearly the speed of light. Their plasma weapons burned at temperatures that could melt through any known shield technology. On the main screen, Admiral Chun watched as human fire tore through a consortium-heavy cruiser. The crystalline ship's beautiful geometric hull cracked and shattered like glass under the assault. Pieces of the vessel spun away into space, trailing atmosphere and debris. "The Hegemony Dreadnought is trying to retreat," reported Captain Martinez. "Don't let it escape," Admiral Chun said. "Signal the Wolf Pack in Sector 7. Have them cut off the enemy's retreat route." The Wolf Pack was a group of small, fast human ships that had been disguised as asteroid miners. They moved with deadly coordination, surrounding the massive Hegemony vessel like predators circling wounded prey. Their weapons were smaller than those on the main battle fleet, but they were designed for precision strikes against enemy weak points. Fleet Commander Vexthala felt his ship shudder again as more human weapons found their target. His bridge crew was working frantically to coordinate a response, but the attack had come from too many directions at once. Half his fleet was scattered across the star system, chasing what they now realized: had been decoy vessels. "Give me a communication channel." To the other fleet commanders, he ordered. "Communication. Systems are being jammed," his signals officer reported. "The humans are using some kind of interference pattern that disrupts our standard frequencies." Vexthala cursed in his native language. Without coordination between his ships, the Council fleet was fighting dozens of separate battles instead of one unified engagement. The humans had planned this down to the smallest detail. On his tactical display, he could see human ships moving with precision that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. They were using advanced electronic warfare systems to blind Council sensors. Their ships moved in perfect formation, despite the chaos of battle. Most disturbing of all, their weapons seemed to be designed specifically to counter Council defensive systems. "Sir," Krilfin said, his voice full of disbelief, "the human weapons are penetrating our shields as if they weren't there. It's like they know exactly how our defensive systems work." Vexthala realized with growing horror that the humans probably did know. For decades, the Council had been studying humanity. But during all that time, the humans had also been studying the Council. Every captured weapon, every damaged ship, every piece of Council technology that had fallen into human hands had been carefully analyzed and reverse-engineered. Admiral Chun watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. The Council fleets were powerful, but they had been caught completely off guard. Their formations were broken. Their coordination was disrupted. Most importantly, their confidence was shattered. "Admiral," said Dr. Williams, monitoring communications intercepts, "we're detecting panic in enemy transmissions. Several Council commanders are requesting permission to withdraw." "Let them try," Admiral Chun said. "But make sure they understand the cost of attacking humanity." Human ships were pursuing fleeing Council vessels throughout the star system. The aliens had superior numbers and heavier armor, but they had been prepared for a different kind of war. They had expected to face desperate human defenders fighting from fixed positions. Instead, they found themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy that seemed to know their every move. The battle turned into a rout. Council ships that tried to retreat found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had somehow predicted their movements. Alien commanders who attempted to regroup discovered that their communications were compromised and their tactical plans were being intercepted. In the asteroid field where Admiral Chun's flagship was hidden, the Defiance and its escort vessels systematically destroyed a Protectorate patrol squadron. The alien ships were larger and more heavily armed, but they could not target enemies they could not see. Human stealth technology, developed in secret over 20 years, made their ships nearly invisible to Council sensors. "Enemy flagship Eternal Glory is attempting to jump to hyperspace," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. "Not yet," Admiral Chun said. "Signal the interdictor ships. Cut off their escape route. I want to send a message to the Council that will be heard throughout the galaxy." Human interdictor vessels, disguised as cargo haulers, activated gravity field generators that prevented hyperspace travel in the local area. The massive hegemony dreadnought found itself trapped, surrounded by human ships that were slowly picking apart its defenses. Fleet. Commander Vexthala watched his fleet disintegrate around him. Ship after ship fell to human weapons that burned brighter than suns. The careful formations that had conquered 47 species were broken and scattered. His communications were jammed, his sensors were blinded, and his escape routes were cut off. "Commander," said his engineer, "we've lost main power to the forward weapons array. Hull integrity is failing on multiple decks. At this rate, we have perhaps 20 minutes before total structural collapse." Vexthala looked around his bridge at officers who had never known defeat. They were staring at their displays with expressions of shock and disbelief. The humans were not supposed to be capable of this level of military sophistication. According to every report, every analysis, every psychological profile. Humanity was a primitive species that could be easily conquered, but the evidence of their sensors told a different story. The humans had been hiding their true capabilities for decades. They had built a secret fleet using technology that matched or exceeded anything the Council possessed. They had planned this battle with a level of strategic thinking that few species had ever demonstrated. "Sir," Krilfin said quietly, "incoming transmission from the human fleet. They're demanding our surrender." Vexthala closed his eyes for a moment. In his long career, he had never surrendered to anyone. But he had also never faced an enemy like this. The humans had not just defeated his fleet. They had completely outmatched it in every way that mattered. "Open the channel," he said. Admiral Chun's face appeared on the main screen of the Hegemony flagship. Her expression was calm and professional, but her eyes held the fire of someone who had waited decades for this moment. "Fleet Commander Vexthala," she said, "your fleet is defeated. Your ships are surrounded, and your escape routes are blocked. I'm offering you one chance to surrender and save the lives of your remaining crew." Vexthala looked at his tactical display one more time. More than half his ships were destroyed or disabled. The survivors were scattered and unable to coordinate a response. The battle was over, and the humans had won decisively. "I surrender," he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Admiral Chun nodded. "Smart choice." News of the human victory spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within days, every species under Council rule had heard the impossible story. The humans, considered weak and primitive by galactic standards, had destroyed 3 entire Council battle fleets in a single engagement. The footage of burning Hegemony dreadnoughts and shattered Consortium cruisers was broadcast on underground networks throughout Council space. Admiral Chun stood in the war room of the Defiance, studying star charts that showed the changing situation across the galaxy. Red zones marked Council strongholds where alien forces were desperately trying to maintain control. Green zones showed systems where local rebellions had successfully driven out Council forces. Yellow zones indicated areas where the situation was still unclear. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, "we're receiving reports from 17 different star systems. Native populations are rising up against Council occupation forces. The vegan colonies have declared independence. The Centauri mining worlds are in open rebellion. Even some of the older conquest zones are showing signs of unrest." Admiral Chun nodded with satisfaction. This was exactly what humanity had hoped would happen. The Council's power had always been based on the belief that resistance was impossible. Once that belief was shattered, the entire system would begin to collapse from within. "What's the status of our liberation fleets?" she asked. "Task Force Bravo has linked up with rebel forces in the Altair system," reported Captain Martinez. "Task Force Charlie is providing fire support for the uprising on Proxima. Task Force Delta is escorting refugee ships away from Hegemony slave worlds." The human fleet had split into smaller groups after their initial victory. Unlike the Council's strategy of overwhelming force, humanity was fighting a different kind of war. They moved fast, struck hard, and then moved on before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Their goal was not conquest but liberation, on the planet Kepler 442b. Commander Sarah Mitchell led a mixed force of human marines and local rebels through the ruins of what had once been the planetary capital. The Consortium had strip-mined this world for 60 years, turning a beautiful garden planet into a toxic wasteland. The native population had been enslaved to work the mines and factories that fed the Council war machine. "The last Consortium stronghold is just ahead," said Zareth, a native Keplerian whose scales had been scarred by years of forced labor. "They've got about 200 guards and a defensive shield generator." Commander Mitchell checked her weapon and looked at the mixed group of fighters around her. Half were human marines in powered armor. The other half were aliens from a dozen different species who had joined the rebellion after hearing about humanity's victory. They made in strange sight, but they fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. "Remember the plan," she said. "We're not here to kill everyone. We're here to free people. Any consortium personnel who surrender will be treated according to the laws of war. Anyone who keeps fighting will be stopped." The attack on the consortium facility was swift and precise. Human technology had given the rebels advantages they had never possessed before. Plasma rifles that could burn through alien armor. Personal shields that could deflect energy weapons. Most importantly, they had hope for the first time in decades. The consortium guards had been trained to fight, desperate slaves with improvised weapons. They were not prepared for a coordinated assault by well-equipped fighters who knew what they were doing. The shield generator fell within minutes. The defensive positions were overrun before reinforcements could arrive. Commander Mitchell stood in the central control room as her forces secured the facility. Through the reinforced windows, she could see thousands of alien workers emerging from the underground mines. Most of them looked confused, as if they could not believe their captivity was actually ending. "Broadcast this on all frequencies," she told her communications officer. "Tell them the consortium is finished here. Tell them they're free to go home or stay and rebuild, whatever they choose. But tell them they'll never be slaves again." Back in council space, the alien leadership was struggling to understand what had happened to their galaxy. In the great chamber on the capital world of Nexus Prime, Speaker Zorthic faced the assembled representatives of 12 species. The emergency session had been called to address the growing crisis. "The human problem has grown beyond acceptable limits," Speaker Zorthic said, his voice echoing through the vast hall. "Not only have they defeated our battle fleets, but they have inspired rebellion throughout our territory. Order must be restored." General Caxmore of the Hegemony military rose to speak. His scaled hide bore fresh scars from the battle with human forces. "The humans are more dangerous than we believed. Their technology exceeds our intelligence estimates. Their tactics are unlike anything we have encountered. Traditional conquest methods will not work against them." "Then what do you suggest?" asked Merchant Prince Veltar of the consortium. His crystalline form flickered with angry light. "We have lost 17 industrial worlds to these uprisings. Our mining operations are in chaos. The economic cost of this rebellion will take decades to recover." Speaker Zorthic looked around the chamber at faces filled with fear and anger. For thousands of years, the Council had maintained order through superior force and careful control of information. But the humans had shattered both pillars of Council power in a single stroke. "We must commit everything to stopping this rebellion," he declared. "Summon the core fleets from the Galactic Center. Activate all reserve forces. We will crush humanity and make an example of them that will discourage future uprisings." But even as he spoke, Speaker Zorthic knew the situation had already spiraled beyond their control. The Council's power had been built on the belief that resistance was futile. Once that belief was destroyed, their empire would collapse like a house built on sand. Admiral Chun received the intelligence reports about Council fleet movements with cold satisfaction. Hidden listening posts throughout alien space were monitoring enemy communications. Spy networks that had been built over decades were providing real-time information about Council military preparations. "They're committing everything to one massive offensive," she told her command staff. "The core fleets, the reserve squadrons, even the home defense forces. They're gambling everything on one decisive battle." "How many ships are we talking about?" asked Dr. Williams. "Our best estimate is between 8,000 and 10,000 vessels," replied Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. "The largest military force ever assembled in galactic history." The numbers were sobering. Even with their hidden fleet, humanity would be outnumbered by more than 10 to 1. But Admiral Chun had been preparing for this possibility since the war began. The Council was thinking like conquerors, trying to solve their problem with overwhelming force. Humanity was thinking like liberators, with a completely different strategy. "Signal all task force commanders," she ordered. "Initiate Operation Wildfire. It's time to show the galaxy that numbers aren't everything." Operation Wildfire was humanity's answer to Council strategy. Instead of meeting the enemy fleet in one massive battle, human forces would scatter throughout the galaxy. They would strike at Council infrastructure, liberate slave worlds, and support local rebellions. By the time the alien fleets reached human space, there might not be a Council left to give them orders. On the mining world of Vega 7, human ships appeared in orbit, just as the local population was beginning their uprising. The hegemony garrison found themselves caught between rebel forces on the ground and human naval bombardment from space. Within hours, another Council stronghold had fallen. In the Centauri system, human marines helped native fighters storm the Consortium administrative complex. Decades of economic records were seized, revealing the true extent of Council exploitation. The information was immediately broadcast throughout the galaxy, showing other oppressed populations exactly how much wealth had been stolen from their worlds. On Proxima Prime, human engineers worked alongside alien technicians to restore planetary communication systems that had been deliberately sabotaged by the Protectorate. For the first time in 50 years, the planet's different regions could talk to each other directly. The results were immediate and dramatic as isolated resistance movements discovered they were part of a planet-wide rebellion. Admiral Chun watched the reports flow in from across the galaxy. Each liberated world sent out signals to its neighbors. Each successful rebellion inspired 3 more. The Council's iron grip on galactic civilization was dissolving faster than even she had dared to hope. "Admiral," said Captain Martinez, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Kepler system. Commander Mitchell reports that they found something in the Consortium archives. Something about Council research into weapon technology that could threaten Earth itself." Admiral Chun felt a chill run down her spine. The Council was desperate, and desperate enemies were often the most dangerous. She had been expecting them to escalate, but not necessarily in this direction. "Get me a secure channel to Commander Mitchell," she ordered, "and prepared the fleet for emergency deployment. If the Council is planning something that threatens our homeworld, we need to stop it before it gets started." The final battle did not happen where anyone expected it to. The massive Council fleet, 10,000 ships strong, arrived at the edge of human space to find it empty. No defensive formations waited for them. No desperate last stands at important worlds. The humans had simply vanished, leaving behind only automated defense platforms and a few token patrol ships. Fleet Admiral Lekvar of the Core Fleet stared at his tactical displays in confusion. His orders had been simple: destroy the human military and occupy their territory. But there was no human military to destroy. Intelligence reports suggested they should be facing at least 2,000 enemy vessels. Instead, his sensors detected fewer than 100 ships scattered across 50 star systems. "Where are they?" he demanded of his intelligence officer. "Unknown, sir," replied the nervous Protectorate analyst. "Our last confirmed sightings had major human fleet elements in this sector. Either they've developed better stealth technology than we thought possible, or what? Or they've left their own territory to fight us elsewhere." The realization hit Fleet Admiral Lekvar like a physical blow. While he had been gathering his massive fleet for one decisive battle, the humans had been fighting an entirely different war. They had not been preparing to defend their space. They had been preparing to liberate the galaxy. On the Council capital world of Nexus Prime, Speaker Zorthic stood in the empty chambers of government. Most of the Council representatives had fled to their home worlds as rebellion spread throughout their territories. The carefully maintained order of galactic civilization was collapsing, and there seemed to be nothing he could do to stop it. "Sir," said his aide, "a young Vorthik named Sekthal. We're receiving reports from across the galaxy. The vegan colonies have formally declared independence and are being defended by human warships. The Altair Rebellion has captured the sector capital. 3 more hegemony slave worlds have been liberated in the past 8 hours." Speaker Zorthik closed his eyes and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The Council had ruled for thousands of years through superior force and careful control. They had crushed every rebellion, defeated every challenger, maintained perfect order. How had one primitive species brought it all crashing down? The answer, he realized, was that humanity had never tried to replace the Council with something similar. They were not conquering territory or establishing their own empire. They were spreading an idea that was far more dangerous than any weapon. The idea that people could govern themselves. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Defiance as her ship entered the Nexus system. Around her, a combined fleet of human vessels and ships from newly liberated worlds moved in perfect formation. The alien crews were still learning to work together, but their determination was unmistakable. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, "we're being hailed by the remaining Council forces in orbit around Nexus Prime. They're requesting a ceasefire to discuss terms." Admiral Chun studied the tactical display. The Council's home system was defended by only a few hundred ships, most of them older vessels that had been left behind when the core fleet departed. The great military machine that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia was finally broken. "Open a channel," she ordered. Speaker Zorthik's image appeared on the main screen. The once proud alien leader looked tired and defeated. His silver carapace was dulled with stress, and his multiple eyes showed an exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. "Admiral Chun," he said formally, "I am authorized by the remaining Council members to discuss terms of surrender." Admiral Chun studied the alien who had declared war on humanity just months ago. She remembered his arrogant words about crushing the human spirit and making an example of their species. Now he stood defeated in the ruins of his own empire, asking for mercy from the people he had tried to destroy. "Unconditional surrender," she said simply. What? Unconditional surrender. Your military forces will lay down their arms. Your governments will dissolve. Your territories will be turned over to their native populations. You will face trial for crimes against sentient beings." Speaker Zorthik's eyes flickered with the last sparks of his old authority. "You cannot seriously expect us to accept such terms. The Council represents the legitimate government of this galaxy. We have maintained order and stability for thousands of years." Admiral Chun's expression did not change. "You have maintained slavery and oppression for thousands of years. You have strip-mined entire worlds, enslaved billions of people, and crushed anyone who dared to seek freedom. Your idea of order was built on the suffering of others." She paused and looked at the tactical display, showing the scattered remnants of the once mighty Council. "Fleet, the galaxy has chosen freedom over your order," she continued. 73 worlds have declared independence in the past month. 37 different species are fighting for their liberation. Your empire is finished, Speaker Zorthik. The only question now is whether you'll accept reality or force us to finish destroying what's left of your military. Speaker Zorthik looked around the bridge of his flagship at officers who had once commanded the fate of billions. They were staring at their displays with defeated expressions, watching as more and more worlds declared their independence from Council rule. "If we surrender," he said quietly, "what happens to our people? What happens to our civilizations?" For the first time, Admiral Chun's expression softened slightly. "Your people will be free to build new governments based on the consent of the governed. They'll be free to trade with other species as equals. They'll be free to explore space, develop new technologies, and create art and literature without council censorship. They'll be free to live their own lives. She leaned forward in her chair. The same freedom we're offering everyone else in the galaxy. The silence stretched for long moments as Speaker Zorthic considered his options. Around Nexus Prime, human ships waited with their weapons powered, but not yet targeted. The message was clear: surrender now and live, or resist and face the same fate as the Council battle fleets. I surrender, he said finally. The Council formally surrenders to the human-led liberation forces. Admiral Chun nodded. Smart choice. Now, there's going to be a lot of work to do. We need to establish new governments, set up trade relationships, and figure out how dozens of different species can coexist without anyone being in charge of everyone else. She stood up and walked to the main viewing screen, looking out at the planet below where billions of aliens were learning that their galaxy had fundamentally changed. It won't be easy, she continued. Democracy is messy. Freedom is chaotic. People will make mistakes and argue about everything. But they'll be free to make their own choices. And that's worth all the chaos in the galaxy. 6 months later, Admiral Chun stood in the same observation deck where she had first heard the Council's declaration of war. Through the window, she could see ships from dozens of different species docked at the orbital station. That had become the temporary headquarters of the Galactic Liberation Council. The new organization was exactly as chaotic as she had predicted. Representatives from newly freed worlds argued constantly about everything from trade regulations to territorial boundaries. The vegans wanted immediate revenge against their former oppressors. The Altarians insisted on complete isolation until they could rebuild their shattered society. The Centaurians demanded massive reparations for centuries of economic exploitation, but they were arguing as free beings, not as slaves or subjects. They were making their own decisions, even when those decisions were difficult or unpopular. The galaxy was louder, more chaotic, and far less organized than it had been under Council rule. Admiral Chun thought it was beautiful. Admiral, said Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, entering the observation deck with a data tablet. The latest reports from the frontier sectors. 18 more worlds have established democratic governments this month. The hegemony home world is holding its first free election in 3,000 years. Even some of the former Council species are adapting to the new system. Admiral Chun smiled. Any problems we need to address? The usual, Rodriguez replied. Border disputes, trade disagreements, and about 50 different arguments over what to do with former Council military equipment. But nothing that requires military intervention. Admiral Chun nodded. The human fleet was still the most powerful military force in the galaxy, but they used that power very differently than the Council had. Instead of enforcing obedience, they protected freedom. Instead of conquering new territory, they defended those who could not defend themselves. There's one thing, Rodriguez added. The Keplerian delegation wants to name a star system after you. The Sarah Chan Liberation System, or something like that. Admiral Chun laughed. Tell them I'm honored, but no. This wasn't about me. This was about all of us working together to build something better. She turned back to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the massive Council battle fleets were being converted into cargo ships and exploration vessels. Former slave worlds were becoming thriving democracies. Species that had been enemies for millennia were learning to cooperate as equals. It had taken humanity 20 years to prepare for the war against the Council.